because I've been asked to lead the cities of Akron's Racial Equity and Social Justice Task Force. Monday is the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday. Black History Month is upon us. I've been reading books concerning African American history. Princeton University scholar Albert J. Roboteau, in his excellent book, Slave Religion, The Invisible Institution in the Antebellum South, quotes Melville Herskovitz, the myth of the Negro past. I can read that quote to you. The resilience of slaves' attitude toward new gods frequently led to slightly modified African sanctions supporting forms of a given institution that are in almost entirely European. In other words, a principle of disregard for other forms while retaining an inner value is characteristic of Africans everywhere and is the most important single factor making for an understanding of the acculturative situation. Oh, that's a big stuff. So let me see if I can help you understand. What he's saying is the slaves were resilient because they had the ability to disregard other forms of religion and culture while retaining their value. The word that grabbed me and threw me up against the wall was the word resilience. The New Oxford American Dictionary defines resilience as the capacity to quickly recover or to recover quickly from difficulties. America is facing unprecedented difficulties. Whether our response will be resilient remains to be seen. The fact that we still are here in America is a testimony to the resilience of African Americans. The visible church is facing unprecedented difficulty, and the jury is out on whether we will recover or what that recovery will look like. The invisible church is invincible, but the visible church is vacillating. So my concern is the leaders of the visible church. Will we demonstrate resilience in the face of intractable difficulty? There was a line in Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech, which has come to my attention. It's been there all along, but I haven't been able to see it for some reason. And it captures what resilience is about. He said, with this faith, we will be able to hew of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. That is our aim, to hew stones of hope out of the mountain of despair. I feel like shouting already, because right there we can see that we've got some serious stuff going on that is keeping us back from what we need to do. And our resilience is being impacted in a powerful way. So shortly after reading Slave Religion and being thrown up against the wall by the word resilience, I picked up the book Tempered Resilience: How Leaders Are Formed in the Crucible of Change by Todd Bolsinger. He's also the author of Canoeing the Mountains. You may have heard of that book. I highly recommend both of those books. One of my house prophets gave me this book some time ago. I threw it in one of my stacks because I do a lot of reading, but it caught my eye in this opportune season. Bolsinger uses the metaphor of a blacksmith working with a piece of metal to God working with a leader. A piece of metal is tempered, made flexible, and at the same time stronger through the process of beating and heating and cooling and stressing. Likewise, a leader is tempered through sabotage, through stress, and through leadership challenges. Do you know something? That the very people we try to help often end up sabotaging the help we're trying to give them. Now, I know this is not the message you want to hear, because you're in the American leadership. You lead, everybody follows. That's all that's really going on. But in biblical leadership, there are challenges that we must face that make it a part of the tempering process that brings us into the character that God has for us. Isaiah 48:10, behold, I have refined you, but not as silver. I have tested you in the furnace of affliction. Silver is refined through fire. But in contrast, Israel was refined through the fire of affliction. Likewise, leaders are tested and tempered through sabotage, through stress, through affliction, and through leadership challenges. Just for a moment, let me give you uh, some of first a quote here that I think will really kind of start to bring some of this home. The ultimate goal of adaptive change is not to master a pain-free solution to a pressing problem. It's to create adaptive capacity, the wisdom, the courage, the resilience within a people to learn and to survive the losses necessary to be transformed and to thrive in a changing world. So we are discussing not only the resilience of the pastor, but the resilience of the church or a group. We, as leaders of God's people, want to develop wisdom, courage, resilience within our people to learn and survive the losses necessary to be transformed and to thrive in a changing world. Now, this is something that I don't know if a lot of people are talking about, but change precipitates loss. We must help people develop resilience to learn from the losses and to survive the losses that are necessary to be transformed and to thrive in a changing world. In short, we are talking about a resilient church. That begs the question, what are the principles of being a resilient church? Let me just give you another quote. If resilient leadership is about taking responsibility to face often brutal reality with hope, to find meaning in setbacks, to use creative adaptation to work through challenges, and to overcome both a failure of nerve that will shrink back and a failure of heart that dissolves into cynicism, how do resilient leaders form a resilient people? Let me just hit those aspects again. Taking responsibility to face the often brutal reality with hope. Reality is often brutal, but we want to face it with hope. Taking responsibility to find meaning in setbacks. They're going to be setbacks, but we want to find meaning in those setbacks. Taking responsibility to use creative adaptation to work through challenges. Taking responsibility to overcome a failure of nerve that shrinks back from leadership, and taking responsibility to overcome a failure of heart that develops into cynicism that disconnects from people. To develop these aspects of leadership is incredibly important. And so these are principles of a resilient church. A group is formed for bringing change because of challenges facing an organization. The group needs to develop and affirm a clear, grounded organizational identity and mission, and grow in the capacity to be teachable, attuned, adaptable, tenacious. The group needs to be able to practice vulnerable reflection and experience the trust and safety of strong, supportive relationship. And the group needs to be led through the change by a resilient leader who regularly practices and demonstrates the value of learning, listening, looking, and lamenting. Let's just take that first one. A group is formed for bringing change because of challenges facing an organization. We want to face brutal reality with hope. We want to find meaning in these setbacks. Willie Jolly said, a setback is a setup for a comeback. I like that. I feel like shouting there. We want to use creative adaptations to work through challenges. We need spiritual creativity through the creativity of the Holy Ghost. And we want to overcome both a failure of nerve that will shrink back from leadership. Sometimes stuff can get so tough that we shrink back from leadership. It's called a failure of nerve. That's what the author calls it in the book. And we want to overcome a failure of heart that devolves into a disconnected cynicism. Some leaders just give up because it's so exasperating. It's so difficult that they walk away and give up. This needs to be applied to each specific church concerning its establishing and particularly the current pandemic. Let's go through the next one. Each church needs to develop and reaffirm a clear, grounded organizational identity and mission. Each church or or leadership group needs to grow in capacity to be teachable, to be attuned, to be adaptable, to be tenacious. We are depending upon, and we need a humility that supports teachability. If you're going to be teachable, you have to have a certain amount of humility so that you may be able to learn from many people. Attunement to our followers means being with people in a way that they can face the losses that change will inevitably bring to them and helping them grow as a result. Being with people in their loss, being with people in facing their grief and in lamenting their grief so that they can adapt, be transformed, and move forward as God would want them to. We need to be able to adapt to various situations. We can't be rigid right now. We need the ability to move and to adapt to the things and the changes that are coming so rapidly. And we want to be tenacious. We want to, let me put it in biblical terms, bear up patiently under suffering. The concept is the same word as the word perseverance or perseveres in James 1:12. Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial, New American Standard. For once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. The Greek word means to bear up patiently under suffering. We're going to have suffering, but we're going to bear up patiently under it. Not only that, but we need to practice vulnerable reflection. We need to be vulnerable with our thinking amid our team and our members. We need to learn to think out loud so they can see how we are processing things and what God is doing in our thinking. Do you remember long division? When we studied long division, or you did in school, the teacher didn't care about the answer. The teacher cared about the process that you went about to get that answer. Well, we need to be able to share with people the process that God is taking us through as we move in our thinking. We need to experience the trust and safety of strong, supportive relationship. My motto is relationships are everything. And relationships are the context of tempered resilience. I have bad news for some folks. Tempered resilience is not learned from books. Tempered resilience cannot be learned from a seminar. But tempered resilience is learned through active leadership. You can't learn to do leadership by simply studying it. You learn to do leadership by doing leadership, and you do leadership in the context of relationship. It is not educational. It is not intellectual. It is relational. As we work in the relationships of the leadership that God has given us, the tempered ability, the tempering that comes from the struggles and the sabotage and the stress will temper not only us, but the group that God has given us to lead. Well, let's go to that last one. So finally, we need to be led through change by a resilient leader who regularly practices and demonstrates the value of learning, listening, looking, and lamenting. We must demonstrate a value for lifelong learning, which requires that humility. We must actively listen to staff and members of our churches and of our group. We got to actively listen, not just kind of passively walk through, but active listen. You can look that up and you'll find a lot on it. We must look at or know our sheep before we make decisions. We've got to know well the condition of our flock. And we must help our members grieve and verbally lament the losses involved in change. I'm going to say that again because I know this is new for a lot of people. Change brings loss. We need to help people to navigate that loss through grief recovery, through processing our grief, and through lament, through verbalizing our grief. In closing, considering the pandemic and all that we are facing, we need to reframe our vision as we canoe the mountain. Another way of saying that is we must reconceive the Great Commission. Reconceive the Great Commission. On page 27, Bolsinger writes, reframing creates the sensation of momentum. It honors an organization's past. It celebrates the progress that has already been made, and then it challenges the group to continue the work, to finish the job, to accomplish the mission that is already in progress. So, as I read through the paragraph, I closed that book and I began to work on the slogan. And God began to give me this slogan: reproducing resilient relationships. First, we want to be reproducers. Spiritual reproduction is the product of a relational process. I hope you're getting that. We're not simply educating students. We're not simply leading leaders. We are in a reproductive process, a relational, spiritual process, not intellectual, not rational, relational. Second, we want to reproduce resilient relationship. The relationships I have in mind are your relationship with God, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with others. And then the fourth relationship that a lot of people miss because they miss Genesis 1-3, where we begin in the Garden of Eden, our relationship with creation. By resiliency, we mean relationships that rebound quickly from difficulties. I don't know about you, but I've been pastoring for 47 years, and I've worked with all kinds of people, and generally, the relationships that we've had are somewhat brittle. They end when things don't go the way they ought to go. I have multiple services or used to, so people would step out, go to a different service, so I don't have to deal with somebody. But we need to recognize that resilient relationships can come back quickly. They rebound quickly. That points to, when I say resilient relationships, to healthy relationships, to mature relationships, to strong and to committed relationship. We as a church ought to be interested in reproducing resilient relationships. When I did this for my church, this might have some help you. There are some specific areas that I had in mind: touching seniors and helping them get online through Zoom, using Zoom and other media to enhance all of our relationships, rebuilding in-person opportunities when possible, reframing what the church of the future is going to look like because we have no idea, and then solidifying an identity and a mission of our church. Our biblical mandate is reproducing resilient relationships.